The gunshot that rang through the saloon wasn't meant for her, but Hannah Foster still flinched like it had grazed her soul, her hands trembling as she poured another whiskey for the gambler who didn't even look up from his cards. It was 1879 in Butte, Montana, and the copper mines had brought every kind of desperate soul to this rough-hewn town carved into the mountainside, including her. She'd been working at the Silver Dollar Saloon for 3 months now, serving drinks and dodging wandering hands, trying to scrape together enough money to move on to somewhere, anywhere, that might offer a woman like her a chance at something better. But better seemed like a dream that belonged to other people, the kind of women who wore clean dresses and walked down proper streets without men calling after them. The cowboy who walked through the door that night had dust on his boots and an honest face, which made him a rarity in a place like this. Hannah noticed him immediately because he didn't swagger like most men did when they entered the saloon. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that needed cutting, and his eyes swept the room with a careful assessment that spoke of intelligence and caution. Those eyes were a striking shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the mountains, and when they landed on her, Hannah felt something shift in her chest that she couldn't quite name. "Whiskey, please," he said when he reached the bar, his voice low and polite. "Been riding for 2 days straight." Hannah poured the drink with practiced efficiency, trying not to let her hands shake under his gaze. He was younger than she'd first thought, probably no more than 25, with a lean build and sun-weathered skin that spoke of long hours outdoors. There was something different about him, something that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "That'll be 10 cents, she said, keeping her voice neutral. He paid and drank slowly, savoring it, which told her he wasn't a man who wasted money on excess. She turned to serve another customer, but she felt his gaze follow her, not in the leering way she was accustomed to, but with something that felt almost like curiosity. The night wore on with its usual chaos. A fight broke out near the back tables over a disputed poker hand, and the piano player pounded out tinny melodies that barely carried over the noise of rough laughter and rougher conversation. Hannah moved through it all like a ghost, invisible and untouchable, the way she'd learned to be. When a miner grabbed her wrist and tried to pull her onto his lap, she extracted herself with the weary efficiency of long practice, her face showing nothing, but the cowboy saw. He was on his feet in an instant, crossing the distance between them with surprising speed. "The lady's working," he said quietly, his hand resting on the miner's shoulder with just enough pressure to make his point clear. The miner was drunk enough to be stupid. "Lady, this here's just a saloon girl." Hannah's cheeks burned with shame, but she kept her face carefully blank. She'd heard worse, much worse. "It's fine," she said to the cowboy, not meeting his eyes. "I can handle it." "I'm sure you can," the cowboy replied, still watching the miner, "but you shouldn't have to." Something in his tone must have penetrated the miner's alcohol-soaked brain, because he muttered an apology and turned back to his drink. The cowboy looked at Hannah then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his expression that made her want to run. It was pity, perhaps, or worse, compassion. She didn't want either from a stranger. "Thank you," she said stiffly, and moved away before he could respond. She didn't talk to him again that night, but she felt his presence like a constant warmth in the cold room. When he finally left, tipping his hat to her on the way out, she told herself she was relieved. Men like him didn't stay in places like this, and girls like her didn't get second chances, but she was wrong. He came back the next night and the night after that. His name was Nathan Irving, and he was in Butte working as a ranch hand for one of the big cattle operations that supplied beef to the miners. He'd come from Wyoming, following work after his parents died in a winter fever epidemic. He told her these things gradually, over the course of a week, in brief conversations stolen between her serving other customers. He never pushed, never demanded her attention, just sat at the end of the bar and talked to her when she had a moment, treating her like she was worth talking to. Hannah didn't know what to do with that. She'd grown up in poverty in Chicago, the daughter of an alcoholic father and a mother who died when she was 12. She'd come west 3 years ago with a man who'd promised her marriage and respectability, only to abandon her in Denver when he found a woman with better prospects. Since then, she'd drifted from town to town, taking whatever work she could find, which usually meant saloons or laundries or kitchens. She was 22 years old and felt 40, her dreams worn down to the nub by hard reality. "You should stop coming here," she told Nathan one night when the crowd had thinned. "People will get the wrong idea about you." He looked at her with those steady gray-blue eyes. "What idea is that?" "That you're interested in a woman like me." "And if I am interested," her heart did something complicated in her chest, "then you're a fool. I'm not the kind of woman you bring home to meet respectable people." "Good thing I don't know many respectable people," he said with a slight smile. "And I'm not sure I'd like them much if I did." She wanted to tell him to leave her alone, to find a nice girl from a good family, someone who could give him the kind of life a decent man deserved. But the words stuck in her throat because part of her, the part she tried to keep buried, wanted him to stay. Wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than what she'd become. The turning point came on a Saturday night in early September. The saloon was packed with miners fresh from payday, their pockets full and their judgment impaired. Hannah was rushing between tables, trying to keep up with the demands for drinks, when one of the men grabbed her roughly, his hand tangling in the fabric of her dress. She heard the tear before she felt it, the sound of cheap cotton giving way, and suddenly her dress was hanging half off her shoulder, exposing her chemise underneath. The laughter that followed was cruel and ugly. Hannah felt her face flame with humiliation as she clutched the torn fabric, trying to hold it together. The man who'd grabbed her was grinning, unrepentant, and she saw in his eyes that he thought she deserved it, that women like her were fair game for any kind of treatment. Nathan was there before she could even think. He pulled the miner out of his chair with one hand and delivered a punch that sent the man sprawling. "You apologize to her," Nathan said, his voice deadly quiet. "Right now." The miner wiped blood from his lip and glared up at him. "For what?" "She's just a whore." Nathan's jaw tightened, and for a moment Hannah thought he might kill the man. Instead, he reached down and hauled him up by his shirt collar. "She's a lady working an honest job in a hard town. You're a coward who tears clothes off women because you think nobody will stop you. Now apologize, or I'll drag you outside and teach you some manners the hard way." The threat of violence hung in the air. The saloon had gone quiet, everyone watching. The miner, faced with Nathan's cold fury and the suddenly judgmental stares of his peers, mumbled something that might have been an apology. Nathan released him with a look of disgust and turned to Hannah. "You all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, still clutching her torn dress, feeling tears prick at her eyes. She refused to let them fall, not here, not in front of all these people. "I need to go change," she managed to say. "I'll walk you to the back." She wanted to refuse, to maintain some shred of dignity, but her legs were shaking. She let him guide her through the crowd to the small room behind the bar where the girls kept their few belongings. He waited outside while she went in and closed the door, leaning against it as the tears finally came. She only had 2 dresses, and the one she was wearing was her better one. The other was so faded and patched that she was embarrassed to be seen in it during the busy evening hours. She changed into it anyway, wiping her eyes and trying to compose herself. When she emerged, Nathan was still waiting. "I'm sorry," she said, not sure what she was apologizing for. "Don't," he said firmly. "You have nothing to be sorry for. I should get back to work. Hannah." He said her name like it meant something, and she forced herself to meet his eyes. "You deserve better than this," she laughed, but it came out bitter. "Better, Nathan? I'm a saloon girl in a mining town. This is as good as it gets for a woman like me." "That's not true." "Yes, it is." She was suddenly angry at him for making her hope, at herself for being weak enough to listen. "You don't understand. I don't have family, I don't have money, I don't have any kind of reputation worth protecting. I'm lucky to have this job. I'm lucky to have a roof over my head and food to eat. Women like me don't get better, we just survive." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression troubled. "A woman like you," he repeated slowly. "What does that even mean?" "It means I've made mistakes. It means I've done things I'm not proud of just to get by. It means I'm used goods, Nathan. I'm not some innocent girl you can rescue." "I never thought you were," he said quietly. "I just thought you were someone worth knowing. Someone brave and strong and beautiful who's had a harder road than she deserves." The words hit her like a physical blow. Beautiful? No one had called her beautiful in so long. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't do this." "Do what?" "Make me believe in things that can't happen." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, reverent even. "What if they can happen? What if you're wrong about what you deserve?" She wanted to lean into that touch more than she'd wanted anything in years. Instead, she stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "I have to get back to work," she said again, and this time he let her go. But something had shifted between them, something she couldn't ignore or push away. Nathan kept coming to the saloon, kept watching her with those steady eyes that made her feel seen in a way that was both terrifying and intoxicating. And despite her best efforts to maintain her emotional distance, Hannah found herself watching for him, found her heart lifting when he walked through the door. September faded into October, and the nights grew colder. The mountains around but were already dusted with snow, a reminder that winter in Montana was no joke. Hannah had a room in a boarding house that catered to women in her profession, a cramped space barely big enough for a bed and a washstand, but it was hers. On her rare days off, she walked the streets of Butte, watching the respectable women in their nice dresses doing their shopping, and tried not to let envy eat her alive. It was on one of these walks that Nathan found her. She was standing outside the general store, looking at a dress displayed in the window. It was nothing fancy, just a simple day dress in deep blue cotton with black trim, but it was new and clean and beautiful. The kind of dress a respectable woman might wear to church or to a social gathering. "That would look nice on you," Nathan said from behind her. She jumped, startled. "I didn't hear you coming. Sorry, didn't mean to sneak up on you." He came to stand beside her, looking at the dress. "You should get it." Hannah shook her head. "It's too expensive. Besides, I have no use for a dress like that." "Why not?" "Where would I wear it? To the saloon." She laughed without humor. "The men there prefer us in low-cut bodices and short skirts. A proper dress would be wasted. You could wear it other places." "What other places, Nathan?" "I'm not invited to church socials or ladies' teas. That dress is for a different kind of woman." He was quiet for a moment, studying the dress with an intensity that confused her. "How much does it cost?" he asked finally. "I don't know. I didn't ask." She started to walk away, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I should get back." "Wait." He caught her arm gently. "I want to buy it for you." Hannah stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What? The dress? I want to buy it for you." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Absolutely not." "Why not?" "Because I can't accept gifts like that from you. People would think, they'd assume." That I'm courting you, he said it calmly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Would that be so terrible? Her heart was racing. Nathan, you can't court me. I'm not the kind of woman you court. There you go again with that phrase. I wish you'd stop telling me what kind of woman you are, as if I can't see it for myself. And what do you see? She challenged, angry now, angry at him for making her want things she couldn't have. Do you see a respectable woman? A woman your friends would approve of? A woman you could introduce to your family? My family is dead, he said bluntly. As for my friends, most of them are cowboys and ranch hands who judge a man by his character, not by who he keeps company with. And yes, Hannah, I see a respectable woman. I see a woman who works hard, who's survived things that would break most people, who's kind even when she has every reason to be bitter. I see a woman who deserves nice things, even if she doesn't believe it herself. She felt tears burning behind her eyes again. I can't accept it, she said, her voice breaking. It wouldn't be right. Then consider it payment for all the good conversation you've given me over the past month, he said. Or better yet, don't consider it anything. Just let me do something nice for you, Hannah. Please. She should have said no. Every instinct born of years of hard lessons told her to walk away, to protect herself from the inevitable disappointment. But when she looked into Nathan's eyes, she saw something she'd stopped believing existed. Genuine caring with no ulterior motive, no hidden price tag. He wanted to buy her a dress simply because he thought she deserved it. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Because I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. And I want you to have something beautiful just like you are. The world seemed to stop around them, but went on with its busy Saturday routine, people passing by on the wooden sidewalks, wagons rumbling down the street, but Hannah heard none of it. All she could hear was those words echoing in her head. I'm falling in love with you. You don't mean that, she said, but her voice had no conviction. I do. I know it's fast, and I know this isn't the way these things are supposed to happen, but I can't help how I feel. From the first night I saw you in that saloon, trying so hard to be invisible, being so strong when you shouldn't have to be, I've thought about you every moment. I want to know everything about you. I want to hear you laugh. I want to see you in a dress you chose because you liked it, not because it's what someone else expected you to wear. I want to give you a reason to believe that you deserve good things. A tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I don't know how to let someone care about me. Then let me teach you, Nathan said softly. He reached up and gently wiped away the tear with his thumb. One step at a time, starting with a dress. She found herself nodding, unable to speak. He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and steady around hers, and led her into the general store. The proprietor, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, looked up from her ledger, and her gaze flicked between Nathan and Hannah with obvious calculation. Hannah saw the recognition in the woman's eyes, saw her mentally categorizing Hannah as a saloon girl, and felt her face burn. But Nathan seemed oblivious to the social undercurrents. We'd like to see that blue dress in the window, he said politely. The one with the black trim. The proprietor hesitated, as if considering whether serving them was worth the potential damage to her store's reputation. But Nathan was a customer with money, and in a town like Butt, that counted for more than propriety. She retrieved the dress and laid it on the counter. It's $4, she said, naming a price that made Hannah's breath catch. $4 was nearly a week's wages for her. Nathan didn't blink. He counted out the money and then looked at Hannah. Do you want to make sure it fits? There was a small changing area in the back of the store, barely more than a curtained alcove. Hannah took the dress with trembling hands and disappeared behind the curtain. She removed her faded, patched dress and slipped the new one over her head. The fabric was crisp and clean, smelling of newness and possibility. The fit was nearly perfect, just a little loose in the waist, nothing that couldn't be easily altered. She emerged from the curtain feeling like a different person. The dress transformed her, made her look like those respectable women she'd watched from afar. She saw surprise and approval in the proprietor's eyes, and something that might have been grudging respect. But it was Nathan's expression that undid her. He looked at her like she was the most precious thing he'd ever seen, his eyes shining with an emotion so pure and honest that it made her chest ache. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice rough with feeling. She didn't feel beautiful. She felt exposed and vulnerable and terrified. But she also felt something else, something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten what it was like. She felt hope. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Nathan, I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to repay me. Just wear it and maybe smile, and that's more than enough." She did smile then, tentatively, and saw how it lit up his face in response. The proprietor wrapped up Hannah's old dress in paper, and they left the store together. The afternoon sun was warm despite the autumn chill, and as they walked down the street, Hannah was acutely aware of how she must look in her new dress. A saloon girl dressed like a lady, with a cowboy at her side looking at her like she hung the moon. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them stare," Nathan said. "You have every right to walk down this street in a nice dress. Anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me." His protective tone made her feel things she'd trained herself not to feel. "You're going to get yourself in trouble over me." "I've been in trouble before. This would be worth it." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and Hannah found herself relaxing degree by degree. It felt surreal to be treated this way, like she mattered, like her happiness was important. She'd spent so long believing that women like her didn't get happy endings that she'd stopped imagining what one might look like. "Tell me about Wyoming," she said, wanting to know more about him, about the life he'd lived before Butt. He told her about growing up on a small ranch, about learning to ride before he could barely walk, about long days moving cattle and longer nights under the stars. He told her about his parents, his father who'd been stern but fair, his mother who'd sung hymns while she worked. He told her about the fever that had swept through their town one brutal winter, killing both of them within days of each other, leaving him alone at 23 with nothing but a horse and his father's old saddle. "I'm sorry," Hannah said softly. "I know what it's like to lose the people you love." "Tell me about your family," he prompted. She hesitated. She didn't like talking about her past, about the poverty and the pain and the choices she'd made out of desperation. But something in Nathan's steady presence made her want to share, to let him see the ugly parts and find out if he'd still look at her the same way. So she told him. About her father's drinking, her mother's early death, about being passed between reluctant relatives who saw her as a burden. About the man who'd promised her everything and left her with nothing. About the jobs she'd taken, the degradations she'd endured, the slow erosion of her dreams until all that was left was survival. Nathan listened without judgment, his hand finding hers as they walked. "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met," he said when she finished. "To go through all that and still be kind, still have hope enough to get up every morning and keep trying, that takes courage most people don't have. I don't feel courageous. Most days I feel like I'm one bad break away from giving up entirely. But you haven't given up. That's what matters." They'd reached the boarding house where Hannah rented her room. She stood on the front steps, reluctant to say goodbye, wanting to stretch this perfect afternoon just a little longer. "Would you like to go for a ride tomorrow?" Nathan asked. "It's Sunday. If you're not working, I could borrow a wagon from the ranch. We could have a picnic, get out of town for a while." "A picnic? Such a normal, wholesome activity, the kind of thing courting couples did, the kind of thing she'd never thought she'd be invited to. "I'd like that," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. His smile was like sunrise. "I'll pick you up at noon." She nodded and turned to go inside, but he caught her hand one more time. "Hannah, thank you for giving me a chance. I know I'm asking you to trust me, and I know that's not easy for you, but I promise I won't let you down." She wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said, and slipped inside before she could do something foolish like cry or kiss him or both. That night, she hung the blue dress carefully on the hook in her room and spent a long time just looking at it. It was the nicest thing she'd owned in years, and it represented something more than fabric and thread. It was proof that maybe Nathan was right. Maybe she did deserve nice things. Maybe she deserved to be happy. Sleep didn't come easily. She lay awake in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the boarding house around her, thinking about Nathan and his steady gray-blue eyes and the way he'd said he was falling in love with her. She was falling too, had been falling since that first night, but she'd been so afraid to admit it. Afraid that if she acknowledged the feelings, they'd be taken away, that this would turn out to be some cruel joke that the universe was playing on a woman who should have known better. But maybe it wasn't a joke. Maybe, just maybe, this was her chance at something real. Sunday dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day that made the mountains around but look like they'd been painted by an artist's hand. Hannah dressed in her new blue dress, taking extra care with her hair, which she pinned up in a simple but neat style. She had a small mirror in her room, cracked in one corner, and when she looked at her reflection, she barely recognized herself. The woman looking back at her had hope in her eyes. Nathan arrived exactly at noon, driving a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 patient horses. He'd clearly made an effort too, wearing a clean shirt and vest, his dark hair neatly combed. When he saw her coming down the steps of the boarding house, his face lit up with such genuine pleasure that Hannah felt her heart skip. "You look beautiful," he said, offering his hand to help her up into the wagon. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." He ducked his head, almost shy, and she realized he wasn't accustomed to compliments either. They were both damaged people, she thought, trying to figure out how to be whole together. Nathan drove them out of Butte, following a rough road that wound up into the foothills. The town fell away behind them, and soon they were surrounded by the vast Montana landscape, all rolling hills and distant peaks under an endless blue sky. The air was cleaner out here, sharp with pine and autumn leaves, and Hannah found herself breathing deeply, feeling some of the tension that lived constantly in her shoulders begin to ease. They found a spot near a creek, where aspen trees turned the hillside gold and the water sang over smooth rocks. Nathan spread a blanket and unpacked the basket he'd brought. Bread and cheese, cold chicken, apples from someone's fall harvest, and a jar of lemonade that must have cost him extra. It was a feast compared to the simple meals Hannah usually managed. "This is wonderful," she said as they ate, sitting side by side on the blanket. "I can't remember the last time I had a picnic." "I used to do this with my parents," Nathan said. "Sundays after church, we'd find a spot like this and spend the afternoon. My mother always said that being in nature was its own kind of worship. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was." His voice held the sadness of loss, but also the warmth of good memories. "I think she would have liked you. You can't know that." "Yes, I can. She always said to judge people by their character, not their circumstances. She would have seen what I see. A woman of integrity and strength who's never had anyone in her corner. She would have wanted me to be that person for you." Hannah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I want to believe that this can work," she said quietly, "but I'm scared, Nathan." I'm scared that you'll wake up one day and realize what a mistake you've made, that you could have had someone better, someone without my history." He set down the piece of bread he'd been eating and turned to face her fully. "Can I tell you something? Everyone has a history. Everyone has things they regret or wish they could change. You think you're the only one who's made hard choices. I've done things I'm not proud of. I've gotten in fights over stupid reasons. I've been drunk and foolish. I've hurt people without meaning to. We're all just doing our best to get through this life without causing too much damage. It's different for women," she said. "Men can make mistakes and move on. Women carry them forever." "That's true, and it's not fair," he acknowledged. "But that's society's failing, not yours. You shouldn't have to pay for other people's narrow-mindedness for the rest of your life." She wanted to argue, to point out all the reasons why this couldn't work, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself leaning against his shoulder, letting herself be comforted by his solid presence. He wrapped his arm around her, and they sat like that for a long while, watching the creek flow past and the aspens shimmer in the breeze. "What do you want, Hannah?" Nathan asked eventually. "If you could have anything, what would make you happy?" It was a question no one had ever asked her before. She had to think about it, had to dig past all the layers of survival and pragmatism to find the dreams she'd buried so deep. "I want a home," she said finally. "A real home, not just a rented room. I want to wake up in the morning and not be afraid. I want to be respected, to walk down the street with my head held high. I want to be loved by someone who knows all my flaws and loves me anyway." She paused, then added in a whisper, "I want what other women have, the things I've been told I don't deserve." "You deserve all of that," Nathan said firmly. "And I want to give it to you if you'll let me. I don't have much, Hannah. I'm just a cowboy who works for wages. But I'm saving money and I'm good at what I do. In a year or two, I could have enough to buy some land, start my own small ranch. It wouldn't be fancy, but it would be ours. We could build a life together, a real life." Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "Are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking if you'd consider a future with me. I'm not proposing right this minute, though believe me, I want to. But I know we need more time. I know you need to be sure. So I'm asking if you'll let me court you properly, if you'll give us a chance to see where this goes." She turned to look at him, this good man who'd walked into her life and refused to see her the way the world told him to. "Yes," she said, the word coming out strong and clear. "Yes, I want that. I want a chance with you." The smile that spread across his face was radiant. He cupped her cheek with his hand, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with exquisite gentleness. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, and the fact that he asked, that he sought her permission, made her love him even more. "Yes," she whispered again. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was sweet and tender, full of promise and restrained passion, and Hannah felt something crack open inside her, some hard protective shell she'd built around her heart. When they pulled apart, she was shaking, undone by the simple beauty of being kissed by someone who cared about her. "I'm falling in love with you too," she said, the admission both terrifying and liberating. "I think I have been since the beginning." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking and dreaming, painting pictures of the life they might build together. Nathan spoke of the ranch he wanted to own, of raising cattle and horses, of building a house with his own hands. Hannah found herself contributing to the vision, describing the garden she'd plant, the curtains she'd sew, the home they'd create. It felt like playing pretend, like a child's game of make-believe, except this time it might actually come true. As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, casting everything in golden light, they packed up the remains of their picnic and headed back to town. Hannah sat close to Nathan on the wagon seat, his arm around her shoulders, and felt more content than she could ever remember being. The future was still uncertain, still full of obstacles and challenges, but for the first time, she believed she might not have to face them alone. The next weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing affection. Nathan came to the saloon every night he wasn't working late, and on her days off, they spent every possible minute together. He taught her to ride a horse, patiently guiding her through the basics until she could manage a gentle trot without falling off. She taught him some of the songs she remembered from her childhood, and they sang together as they rode through the hills around Butte. The townspeople noticed, of course. People always noticed when someone stepped outside the invisible boundaries of social expectation. Hannah saw the disapproving looks, heard the whispered comments when she passed respectable women on the street. Some of Nathan's co-workers gave him grief about courting a saloon girl, questioning his judgment and his taste. But Nathan didn't waver. He stood by her publicly, making it clear that anyone who wanted his friendship would have to accept Hannah as well. Some people fell away, unable to move past their prejudices. But others, surprisingly, came around. The ranch foreman, a gruff man named Tom, shook Hannah's hand one day and told Nathan he'd raised a fine woman if he could see past surface appearances to real worth. The woman who ran the boarding house, Mrs. Chen, an immigrant from China who understood what it was like to be judged unfairly, became an unexpected ally, inviting Hannah to tea and offering motherly advice about courtship and men. Hannah quit working at the saloon in November. It was a terrifying decision, giving up her only source of income, but Nathan had been saving money and insisted on helping her until she could find other work. She was hired by Mrs. Chen to help run the boarding house, a job that was just as hard as serving in the saloon but came with a measure of respectability. She cleaned rooms and changed linens and helped with the cooking, and if the pay was slightly less, the gain in dignity was worth it. Winter came to Montana with its usual fierce intensity. Snow piled high in the streets of Butte, and the temperature dropped until breathing the outside air felt like inhaling knives. But Hannah had never been warmer. Nathan would come by the boarding house in the evenings, and they'd sit by the fire in the common room, talking or reading or simply being together. He was teaching her to read better. She'd learned the basics as a child, but years of survival had left little time for education. Now they worked through a battered copy of Shakespeare's sonnets that he'd found in a second-hand shop, Nathan patiently helping her with the difficult words, Hannah marveling at the beauty of the language. On Christmas Eve, Nathan took her to a small church service. Hannah had avoided churches for years, convinced that she'd be turned away or judged, but Nathan held her hand and walked in with her like she had every right to be there. Some people stared, but the young minister welcomed them with genuine warmth, and when they sang Silent Night by candlelight, Hannah felt tears streaming down her face. She was part of something again, included instead of excluded, and it was almost more than her heart could hold. After the service, Nathan walked her back to the boarding house through the snow-covered streets. The town was quiet, most people inside by their fires, and the only sound was the crunch of their boots and the soft whisper of falling snow. "I have something for you," Nathan said when they reached the front steps. He pulled a small package from his coat pocket, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Hannah's hands were shaking as she opened it. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a chain, simple but beautiful. She opened the locket and found a tiny photograph inside, a picture of Nathan that must have been taken by one of the photographers in town. "So you'll always have me with you," he said softly, "even when we're apart." "Nathan, this is too much. You shouldn't spend your savings on me." My savings are for our future, he corrected gently. This is different. This is me telling you that you're the most important person in my life, that I love you, Hannah Foster, completely and truly with everything I am. I love you too, she said, the words coming easier now, worn smooth by repetition and sincerity. She reached up and kissed him, there on the boarding house steps in the falling snow, and felt like she was living in one of those stories she'd been told as a child, the ones where the poor girl finds her prince and lives happily ever after. Except this was better than a story because it was real. Nathan helped her fasten the locket around her neck, and she tucked it beneath her dress where it rested warm against her heart. Thank you, she said, for everything, for seeing me when everyone else looked away, for giving me a reason to believe in tomorrow. Thank you for taking a chance on me, he replied, for trusting me when trust didn't come easy, for being brave enough to hope. They stood together in the snow a while longer, neither wanting to say goodbye, until finally the cold drove them apart. Hannah went inside to her warm room, touching the locket through her dress, and knew that this was the best Christmas she'd ever had. The new year, 1880, arrived with bitter cold and deep snow, but also with promise. Nathan had been promoted to assistant foreman at the ranch, which came with a raise in pay. He was saving aggressively now, every penny he could spare going into a tin box he kept hidden in his bunk. Hannah continued working for Mrs. Chen, and she too saved what she could, determined to contribute to their shared future. In February, on a day when the sun shone bright and the snow crunched underfoot, Nathan asked Hannah to marry him. They were out riding, something they did whenever the weather allowed, and he pulled his horse to a stop at the top of a hill that overlooked the valley. Butte spread out below them, looking almost beautiful under its blanket of white, and the mountains rose all around like sentinels. I want to spend my life with you, Nathan said, his voice steady despite the emotion Hannah could see in his eyes. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build that ranch we've talked about and fill it with children and laughter and love. Hannah Foster, will you marry me? He didn't have a ring. They couldn't afford one, and Hannah didn't care. What mattered was the man, the promise, the future he was offering her. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I'll marry you, 1,000 times yes. He pulled her off her horse and into his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and breathless. They kissed there on the hilltop, sealing the promise they'd made to each other, and Hannah felt like her heart might burst from the sheer fullness of her joy. They were married in March in the same small church where they'd attended Christmas Eve service. The congregation was small, mostly Nathan's co-workers, and a few of Hannah's friends from the boarding house, but Mrs. Chen was there, beaming with pride, and the young minister performed the ceremony with genuine happiness. Hannah wore her blue dress, the one Nathan had bought her that day outside the general store, and she'd never felt more beautiful. Nathan wore his best suit, borrowed from the foreman, and when he promised to love and cherish her for as long as they both lived, his voice rang with absolute conviction. They spent their wedding night in a small hotel room that Nathan had splurged on, and Hannah discovered what it meant to be loved by someone who treasured her. It was nothing like the fumbling, selfish encounters she'd experienced before. Nathan was gentle and patient, attentive to her needs, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. When she cried afterward, he held her close and let her release all the pain and fear she'd carried for so long, replacing it with tenderness and joy. I've got you, he whispered into her hair. For the rest of our lives, I've got you. Finding a home wasn't easy. Most landlords in Butte were reluctant to rent to a newly married couple, especially when the wife's past was known. But eventually they found a small cabin on the outskirts of town. Nothing fancy but clean and solid, with a stove that worked and a roof that didn't leak. It was theirs, their first real home, and Hannah threw herself into making it a place of warmth and comfort. She sewed curtains from fabric she bought at the general store, using skills her mother had taught her years ago. She planted a small garden in the spring, coaxing vegetables from the rocky Montana soil. She learned to cook properly, not just the quick, cheap meals of survival but real food that filled their home with delicious smells. Nathan built them a proper bed and a table with chairs, working in the evenings by lamplight, and slowly the cabin transformed from a shelter into a home. Life wasn't always easy. Money was tight, and there were times when they had to make hard choices about what to spend on and what to do without. The winter of 1881 was brutal, and they went through more firewood than they'd budgeted for, which meant less money for other necessities. Hannah's past still followed her sometimes. There were people in Butte who would never see her as anything but a former saloon girl, who crossed the street to avoid her or whispered behind their hands when she passed. But those challenges seemed small compared to what they had. Nathan loved her with a constancy that never wavered, coming home each night and greeting her like she was the best thing in his world. She loved him just as fiercely, taking pride in caring for him, in being the partner he deserved. They talked about everything, shared their fears and dreams, built a foundation of trust and communication that could weather any storm. In the spring of 1882, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She'd never thought she'd be a mother, had convinced herself years ago that children weren't in her future. But now, with Nathan's hand resting gently on her still flat stomach and tears of happiness in his eyes, she let herself believe that maybe she could do this, that maybe she could be the kind of mother she'd always wished she'd had. The pregnancy was difficult. Hannah was sick for months, barely able to keep food down, and there were times when she was so exhausted she could barely get out of bed. Nathan was unfailingly supportive, taking on extra chores without complaint, bringing her water and crackers in the middle of the night, rubbing her aching back when the baby grew heavy. Mrs. Chen checked on her regularly, offering advice and reassurance drawn from her own experiences. Their son was born on a snowy December night, arriving early and in a hurry, as if eager to join the world. The labor was long and painful, attended by Mrs. Chen and the town's midwife, and there were moments when Hannah was certain she wouldn't survive it. But she did, and when they placed the squalling baby in her arms, she looked down at his tiny red face and felt love unlike anything she'd ever known. "He's perfect," Nathan said, his voice choked with emotion. He was sitting beside the bed, looking at his son with wonder. "He's absolutely perfect." They named him Samuel, after Nathan's father, and he was indeed perfect despite his early arrival. He had his father's gray-blue eyes and his mother's dark hair, and from the start, he was alert and curious about everything around him. Parenthood transformed them both. Nathan had always been a hard worker, but now he pushed himself even harder, determined to provide for his growing family. He'd been saving for years, and now his goal was finally in sight: enough money to buy a piece of land and start his own ranch. Hannah, meanwhile, discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She cared for Samuel with fierce devotion, determined that her son would never know the poverty and neglect that had marked her own childhood. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses and the outdoors, just like his father. In 1884, Hannah gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, a calm, sweet-natured baby who seemed to bring light wherever she went. 2 years after that came another son, Michael, who was all mischief and laughter from the moment he could crawl. In 1885, Nathan achieved his dream. With the money they'd saved and a small loan from the bank, he bought 160 acres of land in the hills outside Butte, with a creek running through it and good grazing for cattle. They built a house there, nothing grand but solid and spacious, with room for their growing family and big windows that let in the Montana sun. Nathan started with a small herd of cattle, building slowly and carefully, never taking on more debt than he could manage. Hannah created a home that was everything she'd dreamed of as a girl. She had her garden, now much larger, producing vegetables and flowers that she sold at the Butte market for extra income. She had chickens that provided eggs and occasional meat. She had a parlor with furniture Nathan had built, decorated with curtains she'd sewn and pictures the children had drawn. Most importantly, she had a family, a real family, bound together by love and commitment. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Nathan had an eye for good cattle and a reputation for honesty that brought him steady customers. By 1888, they were doing well enough that Hannah could focus entirely on the home and children, though she still kept her garden and did sewing for other families to contribute to their income. They'd paid off the bank loan and were expanding the herd, looking toward a future that seemed brighter with each passing year. Samuel, now 6, was already following his father around the ranch, learning to ride and rope and all the skills a rancher needed. Rose, 4, was her mother's shadow, helping in the garden and the kitchen, already showing signs of being a skilled homemaker. Little Michael, too, was into everything, keeping both parents on their toes with his adventurous spirit. The people of Butte had gradually accepted Hannah as she proved herself year after year. The women who'd once crossed the street to avoid her now nodded politely when they passed. Some even became friends, impressed by her dedication to her family and her work ethic. The whispers about her past faded, replaced by respect for the woman she'd become. She was Mrs. Irving now, wife of a successful rancher, mother of 3 healthy children, and the past seemed like it belonged to someone else entirely. On their 10th wedding anniversary in March of 1890, Nathan took Hannah back to the hill where he'd proposed. They left the children with Mrs. Chen, who at 72 was still spry and delighted to spoil her honorary grandchildren, and rode out on a warm spring afternoon. The valley spread out below them, but visible in the distance but seeming smaller now, less important. Their ranch was off to the west, the house barely visible but there, solid and real, proof of everything they'd built together. "You remember what you said to me that day in town?" Nathan asked, taking her hand. "When I wanted to buy you the dress, I said a woman like me didn't deserve nice things," Hannah replied, remembering that scared, broken woman she'd been, "and I bought you the dress anyway. Best decision I ever made was accepting it," she said with a smile. "Well, second best. The best was saying yes when you asked me to marry you. I knew then that I was going to spend the rest of my life showing you that you were wrong," Nathan said, "that you deserved everything good this world had to offer. Do you believe it now?" Hannah looked at her husband, at the man who'd loved her when she couldn't love herself, who'd seen worth in her when the world said she was worthless. She thought about their home, their children, the life they'd built from nothing but determination and faith in each other. "Yes," she said. "I believe it now. You taught me that my past doesn't define my future, that I'm not what happened to me but what I choose to become. That love can heal even the deepest wounds. You taught me things too," Nathan said. "You taught me that real strength isn't about being tough or never showing vulnerability. It's about surviving the worst life can throw at you and still finding the courage to hope. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Hannah Irving." She leaned against him, his arm coming around her shoulders in the familiar, comforting gesture that still made her feel safe after all these years. "We've built a good life," she said contentedly. "The best life," he agreed, "and it's only going to get better." He was right. The ranch continued to prosper through the 1890s. They expanded their holdings, buying adjacent land when it became available, increasing their herd until they were one of the more successful operations in the area. Nathan hired on a few hands to help with the work, and Hannah found herself managing a larger household, but she loved the challenge. More children came. In 1891, twin girls named Emma and Grace arrived, doubling the chaos and the joy in the Irving household. In 1894, their youngest, a boy they named Daniel, completed their family of 8. The house rang with laughter and occasional arguments, with the sounds of children growing up safe and loved. Hannah sometimes thought about the woman she'd been in that saloon, serving drinks and dodging groping hands, convinced she had no future worth hoping for. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from a story she'd once been told. The real Hannah Irving was this person. A mother who bandaged scraped knees and read bedtime stories. A wife who still felt her heart skip when her husband walked into a room. A rancher's wife who could organize a barn raising or a church social with equal competence. But she never forgot where she'd come from. When she went into Butt for supplies and saw young women in situations similar to what hers had been, she went out of her way to be kind, to treat them with the respect they weren't getting from anyone else. She'd hired more than one former saloon girl to help with laundry or childcare, giving them a chance at something better, paying forward the gift Nathan had given her all those years ago. On the evening of their 20th anniversary in 1900, their children surprised them with a party. Samuel, now 18 and basically running the ranch alongside his father, had organized the whole thing. Rose, 16 and beautiful, had done the cooking with help from her younger siblings. Even little Daniel, just 6, had contributed by picking wildflowers for the table. Friends and neighbors filled their home, people who'd become family over the years. Mrs. Chen was there, now in her 80s but still sharp as a tack. The ranch hands came, bringing small gifts and good wishes. Even the minister from their church attended, blessing their union and praising them as pillars of the community. As Hannah looked around at the life she'd built, at the people who loved her and the children she'd raised, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was more than she'd ever dared to dream of back in that saloon in 1879, more than she'd thought possible when Nathan first told her she deserved nice things. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the children were in bed, Hannah and Nathan sat together on the porch of their home, watching the stars come out over the Montana mountains. "Do you ever regret it?" Hannah asked quietly. "Choosing me instead of someone easier, someone without my history?" Nathan pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Not for one single second. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Hannah. You and the life we've built together. I'd choose you again every time." "I'd choose you too," she said, reaching up to touch the silver locket she still wore every day, the one he'd given her that Christmas Eve so long ago. "You saved me, Nathan." "No," he said firmly. "You saved yourself. You just needed someone to believe in you until you could believe in yourself." "I'm honored that I got to be that person." They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts. The ranch would continue to prosper. Their children would grow up and have children of their own, carrying forward the legacy of love and second chances. And Hannah Foster Irving, the woman who'd once believed she didn't deserve nice things, would live out her days surrounded by every good thing she'd ever dreamed of, held safe in the arms of the man who'd loved her first and best. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of challenges and blessings. Samuel married a nice young woman from a neighboring ranch in 1903, and in 1904, Hannah became a grandmother for the first time when Samuel's wife gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Holding her grandson in her arms, Hannah marveled at the chain of love and life that extended from her. This woman, who'd once thought she'd never have a family at all, Rose married in 1906 to a schoolteacher from Butte, a kind young man who valued her intelligence and spirit. They settled in town, and Rose would bring her own children to visit the ranch regularly, letting them run wild in the spaces where she'd grown up. Michael, the adventurous one, tried his hand at various professions before finding his calling as a veterinarian, studying in Denver, and then returning to Montana to care for the animals of the region. The twins, Emma and Grace, so alike in appearance but so different in temperament, both found their own paths, Emma becoming a nurse and Grace taking over the management of the ranch's financial affairs, as she had a gift for numbers. Young Daniel, the baby of the family, showed every sign of being a rancher like his father, with a natural way with horses that amazed everyone who saw him ride. Nathan's hair turned gray, and his face grew lined with years of sun and wind, but to Hannah, he was still the handsome cowboy who'd walked into that saloon and seen her as worth saving. Her own hair silvered too, and her hands grew rough with decades of work, but Nathan still held them like they were precious, still told her she was beautiful, still made her feel like the luckiest woman in Montana. In 1910, on a warm summer evening, they sat together on their porch like they'd done countless times before, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Their grandchildren played in the yard, 6 of them now with more on the way, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "It's been a good life," Nathan said, his hand finding Hannah's like it always did, an unconscious gesture worn smooth by decades of practice. "The best life," Hannah agreed, echoing his words from years ago. "Thank you for showing me I deserved it. Thank you for being brave enough to believe me," he replied. They'd been married for 30 years, together for 31, and Hannah still felt that flutter in her chest when she looked at him, still felt grateful for the miracle of being loved so completely. She thought sometimes about that scared young woman in the torn dress, the one who'd insisted she didn't deserve nice things, and wished she could go back and tell her that everything was going to be all right, that the best parts of her life were still ahead of her. But maybe that young woman had known, on some level, when she'd accepted that blue dress from a cowboy with kind eyes. Maybe she'd recognized the beginning of her own salvation, her own happy ending, even if she hadn't been ready to admit it yet. As the sun sank below the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Hannah leaned against Nathan's shoulder and smiled, content in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with, living the life she'd always deserved but never dared to dream of, until one cowboy showed her it was possible.